In this episode, we're taking a look at how we can create a page transition within React. The way we set up the routing in this project does involve using React Router, and the animations do come from GSAP. So it's both React Router and GSAP for these page transitions. So we can see that it kind of just floats up when it's exiting, and then when we enter the new page, it flows in from bottom to top. It's a really cool subtle animation, so let's go ahead and see how we can do that. To get things started, I've already installed Create React App in our directory. So let's go ahead and clear this and install the dependencies that we're going to use. Let's go ahead and write npm install node.js since we are using Sass. We are also going to use GSAP, and we need to install React Router DOM. With React Router DOM, we do need to use React Transition Group. This is specifically so that we can target when our page is exiting and entering. Go ahead and install all four, and in the next screen I will run npm run start to get things going. So we've got all those installed. Let's clear this and open up VS Code, and we can also close this, and we'll leave real ipsum because we're going to need to get some dummy text here in a sec. Now let's open up app.js, and we also need index.js. So we are using React Router, like I said, but this isn't a tutorial on React Router. It's more of creating those page transitions. So I'm not going to be taking my time to describe how React Router works. There's a lot of tutorials for that, and I'll link them in the description below. Now, to get things started with React Router, you need to wrap your entire application in a browser router. And to do that, instead of using the app.js, we're going to use the index.js. So inside here, we can import, and some people like to call it router. We can import browser router as router, and we're going to simply import this from React Router DOM. We can then wrap our application with the router component, and just take the application, place it in there, and save that. We won't need to come back to this, so we could just close the index.js out. And what I'm going to do is actually, let's run, pulling up a terminal, let's run npm run start, which will start our project up in the browser, and we can then close. Wow, that's messy. Let that run. Let's make this a bit bigger. Let's go into the code and let's set up the project structure. First, we want to switch the CSS file to app.scss. So let's just rename this, and we can just get rid of the stylings that are already set. Inside our app, we don't need all this, so we could get rid of everything inside the app div. We can also remove the logo if we want. And let's create a new folder in our sourced folder. And we can name this folder pages. We can create another folder, and we'll name this folder components. In our pages directory, we can create a new file for a home.js, and we'll create a functional component for home, and we'll just call this home, or just write homepage. And I'll try to go as quick as possible because this tutorial is going to be a bit lengthy. So go ahead and create an about.js. And we're going to create a functional component for about, and we'll call this about page. Let's save this, and then we can jump into our components. For the components, we're going to have a header.js, and this is going to be our header. And in our header, let's do a header component. And for the class name, I want to say, what are we going to write? We're going to do a header class. And thanks, in the previous video, I mentioned that JSX wasn't working in my React project, and I'm fairly new to VS Code. I definitely used to use Atom a lot, but you guys mentioned that I need to do some configuration in order to get VS Code's JSX emit thing working. So it works now. Thanks for that in the previous video if you commented. To get things started, we're going to import a component from React Router DOM called nav link. And so link is typically the links between these routes, so the navigation tags. But what's special about navlink is it allows you to give it an active class. So when you jump from page to page, it will notify you which actual page you're on. So it'll just have like an active class. In our case, it was just sort of like a bolder background or a red background. So to keep things simple, I first want to create the routes so that we can navigate to them, and then I will do the header. But in this case, we could just leave it like so for now. It's completely blank, which is fine because we don't have anything in our app.js file. Now to define our routes, I'm going to create an array for our routes, and it's going to take 3 different properties. So let's create a routes array, and our first object, we're going to have a path set to the home directory. So this will just be home. Next, we will create a name, and the name will be home. And then for our component is just going to be assigned to the home component, which is in our pages right here. So let's copy this and add it one more time. And then we could finally say our about directory, or the path, is going to be about. The name is going to be about, and the component is going to be the about component. So we've got our routes set up. We can import those pages now. We're going to import the about page from, if we jump into jump into the pages directory and locate home. We can copy and paste this one more time and switch switch the about, to home. So we're bringing in both our about and home pages or components, and then our route is telling us that the path of the main directory or the home is going to be for our home, and then the path for /about is going to be for our about component. We can then create some routes. Now to create routes, what we need to do is we need to import route from the React router DOM. So let's go ahead and do that. And then we can scroll down, or just, we don't need to scroll here, but just go down to the JSX. And in here, what we can do is bring in routes. And inside route for now, because I just want to render out the pages, we can bring in the home component in between these 2 tags. And the attributes routes going to take a path attribute. And so the path attribute is going to be the /home. When we clear this up, we are going to map through our routes array and then display the routes path. But for now, I just want to just code it in here just to get things started. So path is going to be the home directory, and it's going to render out the home component. If we save this and take a look, we can see the home page is now being rendered out. But we also want to render out the about page. Right now, if we visit localhost 3000 /about, I put about about, it's still going to give us the home page. Now, we need to copy this and paste it in here. And we are going to render out the about component when we visit the about path. Let's save this, and if we refresh, we can see that yes, it's rendering out the about page in the /about, but it's given us also the home page. And if we visit the home page, it's just given us home page. And why is that? In React Router, they have something, or an attribute actually, called the exact attribute. And this exact attribute will match the path exactly. So now when we visit the home page, we'll get home page. And if we visit /about, we only get the about page. Simple enough. There's a lot more you can look into. I just got a text. There's a lot more you could look into, but again, this video is primarily for page transitions. So we've got this coded out and it's good. But what we need to do is incorporate this routes array. Now to incorporate this routes array, what we could do is we could do routes.map. Wow, what is going on? Routes.map. And we are going to pass in, this is using, oh my God, I am blanking out. It's not a tree shaking method, destructuring. So instead of using like route.map and then .name or whatever, or path, we're just going to use destructuring to bring in our path and component. So we got path here, and we also need to bring in component. And then we're going to create an arrow function. And then inside our map function, we are just going to return the route. So In here, you can just put routes with we don't want to self-close it just yet. We're gonna put the routes in here, and inside the route, we can create a div, and this div, let me use emit, I'm going to erase, sorry. No, what am I doing? Okay, we're going to create a div that will have a class name of page, and inside this page div that will be on every single page, we are going to render out the component. So we can then bring in components, which is going to be home and about, and we'll render it here. Now the route is going to have a key. Since we're using map, we need to use key. The key is going to be path. You can have path or the name. It's all up to you. In this case, we'll just say name. And the path is going to be set to path. Now we also want it to be exact, so go ahead and bring in exact. Now I do have an error because our array is route and not routes. So let me just, actually routes makes more sense since it's more than one route. Now save this, and what should happen is about page should be rendered in localhost 3000 about, and then localhost 3000 is the home page. And if we take a look at the console, we have the app, which is our parent component. And then we have the class name of page and the component homepage. Now, if I jump to, where is it at, about, we can see that it's the same structure, just the content inside is changed, still has the class name of page. That is cool, and that's a quick way of setting up React Router, but that's very basic. We want to go beyond that. What I would first like to do is completely code out the about and the homepage with animations, and then work on our routes to incorporate GSAP for that transition. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and jump into the about page and code this out. Now, if you could remember how the project looked like in the end, it had sort of a title page for both the about and the home page, or not a title page. It had a title component for the home and the about page. And instead of needing to write that code twice, we can create a new component and just call it title.js. And this will be the title for both pages. We can just do rf for a functional component, and we'll call this title. So the title is just going to be an h1 tag, and it's going to have the class name of page-title. Inside the h1 tag, we are going to create another div for the line wrap, and we're going to have another div in here with the class name of just line. Now the content for this one is just going to be hello YouTube, and then we're also going to do another line wrap, and the second line wrap will represent the line underneath the first line, which is hello YouTube. So I'll say hello YouTube, let's add a comment here, I'm wrong Akram. We'll save that, and in here what we have is, let's go home, and I think it'll be easier to represent this if we just jump into our home page, and let's import, what is it called, our title component. So let's just render this out instead of having this being rendered out, so we can see what is actually happening. Okay. Jumping in back to the title though, we want to create the animations of the initial title slide. So let's go ahead and do this, and then we could check out how it looks. Now, one thing that we do need to bring in from React is we need to bring in useRef and useEffect. So let's go ahead and bring those in. So useRef will allow us to reference the DOM elements, and then useEffect allows us to wait until the DOM is loaded before executing an animation. Now the first two variables we're going to create is let line 1, and we're going to set line 1 to a useRef of null, so it's not going to exist before the DOM is loaded. And we can copy and paste this again and change this to line 2. And then for our div inside the line wrap, so our line class name div, we are going to add a ref attribute and just put L, I can't spell, L is going to be line 1, assign that to L, and we can just copy this again. So our ref attribute is going to be line 2 and line 1. So this first line is, the variable is going to be line 1. So this div is going to be line 1. And then line 2 is going to be our second div, or the second line. Now, I do want to pause here for a second because both of our pages are working. So we have Hello YouTube, I am Akram for the homepage. And if we jump into the About page, we have About page. But the issue here is we want a navigation working, and we don't have a navigation right now. If we go into our app.js, we aren't bringing in the header. So let's jump into header.js in our component and create the navigation real quick. So for our first navigation link, it's going to be called home. If I could just write that right. And it's going to, the to attribute will tell us what directory it's going to. So it's going to the home page. And we also want this to be exact. And finally, to set an active style, we can just write active style as an attribute and then just write CSS in here, but it's going to be CSS for JavaScript. So font weight is going to be camel cased, and we can just write bold, and then we can just set the color to red. We can copy nav link again and change home to about, and then change the to directory to about. Let's save this, go back into app.js. We can actually get rid of the class name of app, and we can just render out a fragment. So go ahead and leave that empty. And inside this, we can bring in header. And I want to wrap the routes map with a container. So let's create a div for a container and wrap that inside. Now we need to import header as a component. So we can just import header from components and header. Now it's going to render our header, and it's going to then render the contents of our routes. So if I am an about page, it is going to have an active style, which is the bold and the red. And if I switch to the home directory, it's going to render out that content. Now what we could do next is actually code out the content for the about page and the home page, and then work on styling. After styling, that is when we'll get into page transitions. Let's jump back into our home page. And what we want to create is we want to render a inner div. So this is going inside our container from the app.js. And so inside the inner div, we are going to render out the title. And underneath the title, we can create another div. And inside this div, we'll have a p tag. And we can give this p tag a class name of info. So this is where I'm going to grab dummy content and just paste that in. If we go back into our app, we have the headline and little paragraph. Now I want to create the same content for the about page, but just change it up a tiny bit. What I can do is just jump in to our homepage and just copy the JSX and just paste it into our about page. We need to also import title. So let's go ahead and import title. Now, one thing I don't like is the fact that the content is the exact same from Hello YouTube, I'm Wrong Akram, and the about page. To switch that, what we can do is pass in props for our title component. Let's jump into our title component. And inside our title component, we can pass our props. So the props we are going to accept is a line content. And we'll accept a line content 2 for the second line so that this content can be changed. Let's save this, and we can then jump back in to our about.js. And for line content, we can pass in certain content that we want to display. So we can say this is the, and for line content 2, which is the second line, we can say about page. I think that's better than saying I'm wrong Akram, because that sounds silly. Now we could do the same for the home page. We can pass in the title, and so instead of about page, we can say home page. Let's save that, and then finally in our title, instead of this content here, we can then render out line content for the first line, and for the second line, we can render out line content 2. Let's save that, and if we jump between both our pages, it seems to work just as we want it to. We can then finally jump into our stylings, and we are using Google Fonts. So let's go ahead and jump into Google Fonts. we are using two specific fonts. First one we're using is Poppins, and then we are using, this one seems pretty nice. Where is it at? Bebas New. I want to say the font weights we're selecting for Poppins, they're going to be a light font weight and a semi-bold. So let's go ahead and select the import, and we could just drop this into our Sass file. Let's go ahead and target the header class. The header is going to be a width of 100%. We are using Flexbox, so go ahead and write display flex. Align items is going to be set to center, and the height is 100 pixels. Inside our header, we have A tags, which is our nav links. The margin between each one is going to have a 20 pixel margin left and right. The text decoration, we're setting that to none. The color, we're setting that to 101010. And the font size, let's go ahead and set that to 12 pixels. I think 14 would be better since it's a little bigger. The font weight is 600. I wonder if I said font weight for font size. I don't know. Font family, let's go ahead and make the font family Poppins. Great, let's save that and see what we got. That's perfect. So home and about is working and it looks great. We can jump out of our header class and jump into container. The container is going to have a position of relative with the width set to 1280 pixels and the min width set to 1280 pixels. The margin is 0 auto and the display is going to be flex. Finally, we are justifying the content to the center. Then we can target the page class, and inside the page class we're having an absolute position, and inside the page there is an inner. So the inner is going to have a display of flex and a justify content of center. And finally, inside the inner we jump into our H1, which is going to be the content. So the H1 is going to have a different font family, and the font family is going to be that second option that we imported, which is Bebas New. And the font size on this one is going to be 52 pixels with the letter spacing set to 0.1 rem. Then we have a line wrap class inside that H1, and the line wrap is going to have an overflow of hidden with the height set to 66 pixels. Let's scroll down a bit, and outside the H1 we have our P tag, and the P tag has a font family of Poppins, which is the other font that we imported, and the margin top is set to 200 pixels with a width of 340 pixels. The font weight, we're gonna set that to 300 pixels, and the line height, let's do that, set to 24 pixels with the font size of 14 pixels. Let's save this and take a look at what we have. So we've got this first page, and then we've got the about page. This looks really good, and it is getting us to where our final project looks like. Here is where we're going to code out the page transitions. The very first transition I want to make is to our titles. I did start a bit using useRef, but we didn't even get close to being done. So what we want to do here is create that reveal effect that we have on our page titles. And to do that, we need to import our lovely friend GSAP. And this is kind of exciting because the other day after I released the previous GSAP tutorial, GSAP came out with version 3. Lots of cool things in it. But I'll keep it simple. I won't necessarily dive too deep into the new features of GSAP, maybe in the future video. But what we're going to do in here is we're going to use our use effect. And so let's go ahead and write our use effect. And for our use effect, we need to depend on line 1, and we also need to depend on line 2. So now all we need to do, instead of importing tween max or tween light or timeline light, we can just use gsap.from, which is pretty cool. So the two variables we were working with and we're creating that stagger effect is line 1 and line 2. So let's go ahead and create an array for line 1, and we're also bringing in line 2. After that, we are going to define the duration, which is 0.8 seconds, and then we pass in the configurations or properties that we want in here. We want to give this a delay of 0.8 after it's loaded to run. Then we want the ease, oh my god, they need to get out of my way. We want the ease set to power 3, power3.out. And with version 3, we don't need to bring in power3 or any of the easing options. We can just write it like so. So this just says power3.easeOut. And then our y is going to be set to 64. And then finally, we want to stagger them. So it's going to be a stagger, and the amount that we want to separate each transition or effect by, we want it to be separated by 0.15 seconds. Let's save this and take a look at what we have. If we switch pages, we should get it working, which is pretty cool. So there is no exit transition. It's just kind of disappearing right away. And then once the, once the DOM's loaded on the next page, or that component's loaded through our use effect, it renders out the transition. Pretty sleek and pretty cool. But this doesn't necessarily involve page transition. This is just running a transition once the page is loaded. Kind of like transitions, but we're gonna do things a bit cooler here in a sec. So this is going to do it for our title animation. We can simply close title.js out and focus another place. So the place we're focusing mainly now is the app.js. We can get rid of or just close home.js and about.js and honestly header.js. We don't need any of that. Now the first transition I want to focus on is sort of creating a opacity transition. And we can do that with GSAP, but honestly, it kind of may get a little wonky with doing animations in GSAP, and especially when they're very small transitions. And so when it comes to learning React Router, and when you learn, you're going to discover that, hey, where's our switch? And in terms of transition, where's our transition group? Now, React transition group specifically said not to use switch or transition group when dealing with animations, especially when working with React Router. And so what they recommend is to use CSS transition. Now, I promise this isn't just CSS transition. We are using GSAP, and I want to show you both of them. What I want to do is I want to bring in CSS transition, and we're bringing this in from React transition group. I also want to go ahead and bring in GSAP, and we're bringing it from GSAP, not GSAP, but GSAP. Cool. So we brought these two in, and let's go ahead and use this. So I did mention I want to create a opacity transition to where it fades out and fades in, and that's fairly simple to do. Now inside our routes, what we need to do is we need to access a prop called match. And so what match is going to do for us is it's going to find out if the link we click on matches the component that is already displayed. And if so it does, we don't want anything to happen, or we don't want to display the new component. So we need to access this match prop, which exists through our route components. Now the component we can render inside is the CSS transition. Now inside the CSS transition component, we can then display our div for the page and the component. Now we are going to pass certain props. So we want to make sure the in prop is set to match does not equal null. We are going to give it a timeout of 1200 milliseconds. And then for class names, make sure to add the S. It's going to have a class names of page. And then finally, we want to set another attribute called unmount on exit. Now it's telling us that match is not defined, and that's because I made a mistake of adding a parentheses rather than curly brackets. So it's going to be curly bracket and then the exact code we just wrote. Now with this, what we need to do is our page class for our CSS transition has certain additional classes added to it, specifically because of the CSS transition. And what that means is we need to jump into our app CSS. And what happens is with page-enter, this is a class that can provide a transition. So with the page enter, we want to set the opacity to 0. And then there's also one called page-enter-active. And so this is when the page you've entered is active, what do you want to happen? We want to make the opacity set to 1. And just like you guessed it, actually we can copy and paste this, and instead of enter, we can change enter to exit. So if you look at the documentation for React Transition Group, there's 4 key elements to when a page is loaded. You got when the page enters, and when it's active, and when it's entering. You got the page when it's exiting, and you got the page when it's exit. So this right here would be entering, this would be entered, this would be exiting, and this would be exited. we don't want the opacity for this one to be 1. We want it to be 0. And we want the opacity for when it's exiting, we want it to be 1. So we want to also add transitions. And for our active class, we can add a transition. For our opacity, we can set this to 400 milliseconds. And we also want a transition delay. And so the transition delay is going to have 600 milliseconds. We can also take the transition opacity 400 millisecond and add it on our exit active class. Let's save this. And if we take a look at our React app, if we switch pages, we can see our page faded out and then faded back in once we reach our home page. Cool. I mean, so honestly, this can be good enough, but if you want to incorporate GSAP in the page transition, there's a bit more work that you need to do. Let's go back into our code and start using GSAP here. To create more animations with GSAP, what we need to do is we need to create 2 functions, one for an animation for when we enter a page and one for when we exit. So to do that, what we need to do is we need to create a function, and we'll just call this onEnter. And then we'll just write a node parameter, and we can just define our animation in here. So this will be the enter animation. We can do the exact same if we just copy and paste this and just say on exit. And this will be our exit animation. Now with React transition group, you can pass these 2 functions in an attribute. So on exit will run the on exit function. And so I'm just keeping the names the exact same here. And the onEnter function will run the onEnter function that we define up above here. What I want to do is I want to first console log node. I can't write. I want to console log node so that we could see what is being defined as our node variable. So on exit, when we exit a page, what is going to be logged, and then when we enter, what is going to be logged. So let's open up the inspect tool and jump into our console. And so this one's an encounter 2 children with the same name or the same key name. Okay, we'll fix that. I know where that's at. But now if we jump into our home page, we are entered with this animation, and then this one is the one that's exited. So if I switch, it's going to be reversed. So this one is the one that's exited, which is our first element or the home page. And the next one entered is this one. So what I need to access is I want to split these up to where they're 2 different divs without using useRef. I need to get to the children of the inner, and so then that will give us the page title and this div so that we can animate these 2 items. For our enter animation, we can do gsap.from, and we can pass in the array so that we can animate 2 different items. We can do node.children, and it's going to be the first element. And so that gives us enough to where we then need to know which element we want. Do we want the page title or the paragraph? So we want the first element child, and that's going to give us the page title. We then want to copy the exact same thing here, but we don't want the first element child, we want the last element child, and this will give us the p tag. We can then exit the array and define the duration. It's going to be set to 0.6 for our duration, and inside the configuration we can then describe what our animation should look like. So we want it to float up and then page transition, and then the next page float in from the bottom or float up from the bottom. And that's pretty simple to do. So entering, we want the Y to be set to 30. We want the delay to be set to 0.6. Our ease is going to be the exact same ease that we had before. It's just we're switching the out to in out. So it's going to be power3.in out. So that's ease in, ease out. And then our opacity is going to be 0. And finally, the stagger, we're setting that to an amount of 0.6. Let's save this and take a look at what could happen here. If we go to the about page, we can see that animation worked, but there is nothing exiting. So the exit animation isn't really working, but the entrance or the on enter animation, you can see it's kind of fading in and going up. We can copy the gsap.from, copy this and put it into our exit animation. And all we really need to change is we need to get rid of the opacity. And we also need to get rid of the delay and then switch the Y from 30 to -30. Let's go ahead and save this. And if we switch pages, it's going to go, oh, that didn't look right. Okay, so something's wrong, but that's fine. Let's take a look at what is wrong. So the issue I had was I had a .from rather than a .to, because we're moving this animation or moving the elements up. We want to send them somewhere. We don't want them to come from a certain place. So if we switch navigation to home, we could see it goes up and then it comes in. Similar to about, it goes up and it comes in. So that is all you really need to know in terms of page transition with React Router and GSAP. It could get a little complicated, but once you get kind of the basics down, you can do a lot of great transitions. That's going to do it for me. If you enjoyed this video and if you want more GSAP and React content, or if you want any other content you want me to go into, please leave a comment down below. Don't forget to like, that really helps me out. And don't forget to subscribe. I'm really close to 400. I never thought I'd be at 400, which is exciting. Thank you for everything and have a wonderful day.